The role of the CIO CTO. Now it's interesting because in Maria and Richard in particular, we don't necessarily have technologists here, but it'll be interesting to see what they look for in their CIO and CTOs. Azita, Tony, Vicky, and I might want to take some notes. But I think that it's changed over the last 5 years, certainly, right? And I think also we often say CIO, CTO in the same breath, and it used to be one was inward facing, one was outward facing. Feels more complicated than that now. There's more nuance to it than that. So be interesting to hear people's views on that. But given how much it's changed in the last 5 years, given the pace of technology, and then things like coronavirus just throwing us all a curveball, yeah. What, as technology leaders, or for others, what would you look for in your technology leaders? How do we need to prepare for that ever-changing job specification? Vicky, I'm going to come to all of you on this because I think we'll all have a view. But Vicky, let's start with you.
It's a huge question. So I'm going to sort of try and sort of bound myself to one piece that I see a trend in at the moment, and I think it's a push for accountability. I think it's definitely a changing nature of the role that I've seen. I think with, as you say, technological advances have pushed us away from, being behind the scenes, keeping things running. Engineering itself isn't as low level as it used to be. There are services that, the sort of, push for cloud services, everything that sort of goes with that does push engineering to a different space for me. You're far more focused on the product. The engineers in the room do have a different mindset. And then as a technology leader, you become far more exposed to the business concerns, the commercial aspect of the business. And then as such, I think as leaders of companies, we talked about regulation, we talked about the impact that technology can have in real world events. The handling of people's personal data, the impact of the spread of communication of information. And I think as leaders, we are being pushed more to the forefront to be accountable for the impact of technology in the world, in companies, on commercial targets. And for me, that is where the role is, I've noticed it become far more prevalent in that arena than I've seen it being in the past. So for me, I think this is all about being able to account for the work your team's doing and take that sort of moral and commercial stance in the way you set up your teams and the way that you push work through them. So that'd be one pillar that I'll contribute.
I think accountability is key. I certainly feel that more and more. And I think it's a good thing. Partly what Richard and Azita were saying earlier on about technology is not the business. It's an enabler for the businesses. I find myself, and I'm sure you guys do, being more part of the business and less part of the actual doing of technology. And I think, therefore, I'm not just accountable for the technology, but I'm accountable for the business being successful as a result of the technology we provide, right? And that becomes a little bit of it's what we've all asked for years, and now it's happening, and we're like, whoa. So
exactly.
Richard, what are you looking for in a CIO, CTO of the future?
Oh, good question. So I'm actually hiring for a CTO right now. So anyone in the audience fancy applying, feel free. For me, it does depend quite a lot on how the business organizes and how it thinks and so on. I took over as CEO last summer, and I guess I'm a massive fan of the sort of model that more digitally native organizations use, like a Revolut, where I guess it's often misused but called the Spotify model of where you're really trying to embed engineering right at the heart of the business, as opposed to having a very siloed functional structure that would have more traditionally been the case. So having essentially customer service aligned, be it internal or external customer service aligned squads that have product owner, designer, front end, back end, data, whatever's kind of needed to get the job done. I think there's quite a massive shift there. Certainly within banking, the classic role of the CIO was you're often really stapling together a bunch of third party rather than building in-house. And it was often, as I say, kind of quite a separate function to the business. So for me, there's that sort of desire to want to work in that way and work therefore very closely with the CPO, the COO. And then I think within that, then sort of for me, the CTO is almost like the overall enterprise architect, the person that really makes sure the thing comes together across those squads is quite imperative. I saw Vladi Senko do that at Revolut unbelievably well with 55 or whatever it was squads running in parallel. and somehow keep the whole thing having some sense of alignment and coherency. So yeah, I think it's a really well, I think it's a critical role and has massively changed in the last few years from what I've seen.
And I think the point about CIO CTO split is an important one. I mean, I would say in my organization I'm doing both at the moment, and therefore am I doing both well? Don't know, I'll leave others to judge that. But I think that, you know, we should look at, you know, a CIO perhaps not worrying too much about the technology, and maybe some of the issues that we've talked about previously about growth. You know, I may be looking to tackle some of the team and remote working stuff that we were talking about earlier. And therefore you might have an opportunity where a CTO could report to a CIO and they're more of an architect rather than the other way around. Does it matter if you know, are they both board level roles, or should they be sort of one role reports to another? Anybody got any views on that? None whatsoever, because they don't want to give up their roles.
I'll chip in on this conversation, if you don't mind. So, you know, I think what you were saying is right. You know, I stopped being the senior technologist in companies years and years ago, and it, you know, I've got, you know, teams of people who are much better at the tech than I am. You know, my role now is more about relationship management, change management, you know, business management, understanding contracts, understanding third-party relationships, the legal aspects, you know, etc. You know, CTOs have developed over the years from being, you know, purely focused on engineering to now being able to actually go out and hold conversations with customers and, you know, lead teams and things like that. And I think that they've naturally progressed, you know, from being a senior dev to being, you know, much more, I'm a business owner, I have business accountability and responsibility. CIO is the same, you know, but I think, you know, IT and technology have, you know, always had this fight to be part of this top table within, you know, businesses, and they want to have a presence and a voice. But I think we're going towards a world now, and I've just jotted some down here, where you know, a business could have a CIO, a CTO, a CDIO, a CTIO, a CITO, a chief digital officer, a chief data officer, a chief product officer. There's more C-level job titles now in technology than there's ever been, and I think it's down to us as leaders to refocus that on what that organization needs. And it's down to businesses as well to work with us to say, I need to focus on digital transformation or product or whatever it may be. But we're going to get to a stage where, you know, where we used to be fighting for a chair, you know, in the boardroom, now there's not going to be enough chairs for us because there's that many different C-levels that are in there. So I think roles are being refocused around being much more around leadership and development and people management, and then having very good deputies who cover products, who cover, you know, architecture, who cover security, who cover design, etc. So I think it will continue to evolve. I'm just mindful that it may evolve into yet more different job titles because we're struggling to try and work out what areas of accountability and responsibility people should have.
Go on, jump in. I think it's, I mean, this is really, I mean, this is where the CEO needs to kind of earn their crust, really, don't they? Because I mean, I've totally seen the proliferation of, like, it's sort of what C-suite job can we create this week type approach, particularly in large companies. I've definitely seen that. I mean, for me, I guess it's sort of the wrong way of thinking about it. I think that, so I always talk about banks and fintechs really. I mean, as they're two things, they're people and they're data. There was literally nothing else. I mean, we don't make fridges or toys or wine. We have no branches. So there's nothing apart from those two things. So if you've got a whole management team that thinks they're nothing to do with data, it's just the CIO's job or the CTO's job, or let's go and bring a CDO because we kind of need someone. It's just completely wrong way of thinking about it. It's sort of, you got to, everyone should care about these things, but clearly there'll be some people that are very specialized in it. But yeah, I think proliferation of job titles is completely the wrong way to approach the problem.
Absolutely, and thank you for that both. Working in transformation in the last 10 years, it has been that we have the CIO that manages the back end, normally infrastructure and so on. The CTO that manages the product portfolio. Oh, we have a lot of data. What should we do? We throw in a CDO in there as well. And then if you're in a regulatory space, you have a CISO, then you have a head of innovation, and and all of them really managing the same thing, which is the technology stack and the product portfolio. So as the digitalization progresses, majority of the CIO functions are being managed by machines. One thing or not, the end game of enterprise digitalization is really everything being managed software as service, by cloud, by augmented intelligence. And when it comes to the product stack and data and so on, so the role of CIO moves from managing infrastructure, you're really understanding the business need and building applications that are enabling business to do their work. And the same way, I think that we have seen that developers, we have front-end, back-end developer, testers, so on, and now we have full stack software development engineers that do everything. I believe all these roles will also merge. And as Richard said, the focus will be on talent management and data insight and how to manage and utilize and secure that data to enable the business.
Sure. Maria, so we talked about lots of roles there, talent management, and whether they're a senior role having lots of people underneath them. But in some of the smaller companies that you look to invest in, you don't necessarily want to spend all your money on a whole load of senior roles, right? So is the day of the all-rounder, the general good all-rounder who can come in and wear all of those hats? Is that what you're looking for in a CIO, CTO or not?
I would say it really depends on the company. It absolutely depends on the company, right? If you're building in financial services infrastructure, you better have built in financial services infrastructure before. There's other companies where, we would back a first-time CTO who's been working for 3 years. Like, it really depends on the company, but I would say it's almost unheard of that we would back someone without a good technical co-founder or without the need to bring one on very quickly. I think that person needs to be the type of technical co-founder that can get something off the ground, but then they usually take one of those two paths, right? As Tony and Azita highlighted, they usually either want to be the engineering manager and really grow the organization, or they want to be the sort of architect, CTO, I guess, traditional, like data, all of that. And I think that neither one is right or wrong, but you usually, as the organization grows, you're going to want both. I think at the beginning, it's more important to have a technical co-founder that knows the space and also is the type of person, like, it's not for everyone to work in a 2-person company and grow it from like the 0 to 1, which is like kind of 0 people in my head, to like 30 and like seed or A round. That is a very particular type of chaos that you either like or you hate. And then, 30 to 100 is another. And so there's different technical people that you need at each of those stages. You need engineers right away, usually, which is always hard to find. The one thing I would add from a big company perspective, because we actually sell into, our companies sell into a lot of CTOs and things like that. And I think I would just put it on all of your radars for those of you that are out there at bigger companies, is there's a dynamic that I'm really interested in as an investor that might affect you differently as a manager. So we've seen this trend where it used to be that everyone sold to the CTOs. And now we're seeing where like it's developer first change. So you're seeing all these movements where basically developers can just put the code in and you've used a product. You haven't signed an MSA, you haven't negotiated anything, hasn't gone through your procurement. And I'm actually personally interested in that in some ways, because there's some interesting movements where it really makes sense to have developer first or even open sourced types of code, but there's kind of all these hybrids now. And I feel like as a manager, you might just want to be a little bit more on top of that, because, before you know it, you could have a lot of things going on with your code base, or a lot of vendors that you might be using that you might not even be aware of. So I would put that on people's radar as something to not to add another thing to your list of ever changing roles, as we just said, but
no, but it's a really good point, and one we need to get on the front foot with, because we immediately go to, let's close stuff down, but then we're all worried we're going to stifle innovation at the same time, right? So how do you balance that out? Yeah, I think actually for me, one of the things, I'm not a control freak, but I like to know what's going on, right? Sort of thing. And I like to try and add value where I can. But one of the things I tell myself and some of my direct reports is you need to be a little bit more comfortable with ambiguity. You need to just kind of not have control over absolutely everything and let a few things play out a little bit. So maybe we're heading in that direction, Maria. And I know that all of my developers are doing stuff that I have no idea about all the time. So
yeah. And if you really like ambiguity, early stage is all for you. Don't worry.
Excellent. So listen, I think in that sense we could probably tie that back a little bit in terms of we were talking earlier about how people grow their roles, how they expand, how they develop their career. A lot of our audience will be next generation technology leaders. They come here to listen to you guys, to expand your experience and how you've achieved different things and get your point of view, right? Under this heading of what's a future CIO, CTO look like, just maybe a one-liner from each of you on what would you tell them to focus on? So Maria, you just gave an example of saying, focus in on getting your devs to be more involved at the selection level of products. What other things? Tony, what would be your sort of one thing for an aspiring leader to make sure they hone a skill on in the next few years?
Learn how to tell a story. When you're in boards and when you're in execs and trying to get things signed off, if you stand up and talk about the technical detail and everything that's important to the technical teams, people will switch off. So you need to tell a story about where you're going from and where you're going to in a language that the board understands. So it needs to be translated from technical into commercial, and make it funny, make it something people can remember. But getting the key points across, because they'll buy into it more, because they're not just seeing a robot stood up, in front of them going through, a technical spec sheet. They're going through what the impact is to my business, what the impact is to my bottom line, what the ROI is, and how it, most importantly, is it going to make me money or save me money? So I would say learn how to tell a story.
Yeah, I like that one. Learn how to tell a story. Really good takeaway. Vicky, what about you?
It's another sort of huge question, but I would put the role down to change is the job. Like your entire role revolves around change for me. The world is changing, tech is changing, the impact of technology changes the world's view of this role, of the work we do, the products that we produce. Technology is hugely powerful in the world, and we have a social responsibility that goes with that. As leaders, change within the organization, especially in high growth companies, your job is to coach and sustain your team and grow your team through huge amounts of change in an organization as well. So I would say get comfortable with change, learn how to navigate it for you, and learn how to bring other people through that change as well, because ultimately that is the job for the most part.
I like that. I think I'm going to give my 2 pence on that one. I think similarly to that, as a leader associated with change, but I think with your day-to-day you need to be comfortable with context switching, and this sort of plays to what we were talking about earlier about the various different roles. Is that it's not just because it interests you, but you need to turn up to every meeting with every one of your different disciplines and your business leaders and be engaged and interested. And if you're not, then to Tony's point, people will just think you're an automaton, right? And so being able and comfortable with context switching so that you can turn up enthusiastic to engage with every subject in every area, I think is a good leadership trait, not just for technologists, quite frankly, but across the board.
Can't do it all yourself.
No, true.
One thing that I would like to add to Tony's storytelling is be prepared to back your story with data. So data science and having information black and white. So based on experience, when we have built data science and use data to inform the business, we have had the storytellers to tell the story of the data. But it's equally important for CIOs and CTOs to be able to utilize that data and tell the story that makes sense and back it up with information.
And I guess
facts,
data brings credibility to the story, right? That's the thing.
Absolutely, it becomes based on data rather based on your personal preference. So it becomes a lot more data driven and data centric approach.
Got it.
Yeah, I would also say to really understand people's motivators. I think to Vicky's point around change management, and you really need to, there's certain engineers who really just want to solve that really tricky problem, right? And like show the technical prowess. And then there's people who love driving the impact. And I think that's something that's getting lost right now in the remote piece is like, people aren't always that explicit about saying, this is what gets me going. And you kind of know it, but I think actually really getting deeper into understanding your team, what drives them, what's their long-term trajectory, how do you enable them is gonna, and a lot of times as a leader, in my opinion, that's like you adjusting your style, not expecting other people to adjust to you. And so how do you do that in a way to make your team as effective as possible?
And I think that's really useful. And also, I as a leader try to think of myself as how do I make myself obsolete by allowing those people to come up and finding which areas of my role that they want to fit into. I mean, one day, you know, we all will be obsolete to a certain extent, right? And so I think being comfortable with that and allowing those people to progress up the chain and take a chunk out of something that you're doing and just getting comfortable with that. Richard, you're looking for your next CIO, CTO. So as you've already pitched once to our audience, what's the one skill set that you're looking for in that future leader, Richard? And everybody sharpen your pens here, right?
I mean, listen, I sort of the comments made earlier, right? I think sort of apply in detail, but I would just echo the point made just now around change is the only constant. I mean, for me, there's something around the sort of the growth mindset that's super important. All the best people I've ever worked with have had a massive hunger to always keep developing themselves and others. Yeah, certainly that powers me. And I think if you're going to be chief technical officer, you've got to have a hunger for that sort of keep learning, keep yourself learning, keep your engineers learning.
Great. All right, well, listen, we're going to wrap up in a second, everybody. It's been really great, and thank you for the questions from the audience. Sorry we didn't get to all of them.